Hi, I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is the Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do.
Hi, this is Steve.
Hello, this is Cara.
And today we have the opportunity to talk about the subject of Parents of Missionaries.
Yes, Steve, can you tell us about our guest?
Yeah, Dr. Cheryl Savageau is a licensed professional counselor. She had a career as a secondary school teacher and then has dedicated her professional life to Christian counseling. For more than 35 years, she counseled and taught families, teens, couples, individuals, and groups in churches, colleges, private practice, and public agencies. She's worked in Ohio, South Carolina, and North Carolina. They had the opportunity to live in the Philippines for a time as well, and she's also had some work in India. She considers her work with Parents of Missionaries a highlight of her service. Together with Diane Stortz, Cheryl co-authored the groundbreaking book, Parents of Missionaries. Today, Cheryl volunteers as head of the wellness ministry at her church in North Carolina. Her entire family shares faith in Jesus Christ, and together they cheer for the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Well, I look forward to meeting Cheryl and hearing her story, and I hope that this really helps raise awareness and understanding of Parents of Missionaries. Cheryl, would you please introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Cheryl Savageau, and I am a retired Christian counselor, volunteering, doing some teaching in my local church and talking with individuals, and married and the grandmother of 6.
Wow.
Okay.
So what brought you into this whole world of Parents of Missionaries?
Well, when I was 37 years old, I involved in Christian counseling, and that led to church counseling. And it was as a church counselor that I got acquainted with Parents of Missionaries. It's kind of an interesting story if you want to hear what happened to me. I think it's a wonderful story of God's faithfulness. I was born into and raised in a ministry family. My parents, both of them were 100% involved, engaged, immersed in Christian education and church work. And so I expected to do that. And I even dedicated my life to full-time Christian ministry when I was in high school at church camp. But then as high school graduation drew nearer, it was like I knew I wanted to be a counselor. For 6 years, went back to school and got a degree in counseling, and got married in 1977 and had children. And it's like, well, I never really got around to using my counseling training. I started staying home and becoming a full-time mother and homemaker, I suppose you'd say. And on the side, I was volunteering a little bit, and I randomly came across this newspaper ad asking for volunteer counselors for the downtown Cincinnati Women's Crisis Center, helping victims of rape and domestic violence. So I thought my counseling training was going to waste. So I answered that ad and got involved 2 years volunteering on, once a week or whatever it was in downtown Cincinnati, seeing some of life's seamiest sides, actually. As I had agreed to be the substitute facilitator at a midweek class in church, I came across a group of Christian psychologists who became aware of what I've been doing downtown and thought they needed my experience in their group. And was pretty happy doing that. There I was living my dream, thanks to God working in my life, and I didn't really understand what he was doing. And then things changed again, and he moved my family to the Philippines. So through my husband's job, and we were there for 2 years, we used that opportunity to serve as tent maker missionaries. While we were there, we learned a whole lot about the life of missionaries on the field, the full-time missionaries. Anyway, we came home and back to Cincinnati, and I started seeing clients in churches and also enrolled in a doctoral program in counseling, and was pretty happy doing my thing when the very missions-minded LifeSpring Christian Church in Cincinnati asked me to establish a counseling ministry in the church. So that's where I came across the Parents of Missionaries, and that's actually where the ministry to Parents of Missionaries, I think, was born.
Yeah. So as you began meeting these Parents of Missionaries, what kinds of things did you discover as you had conversations with them?
That's my second interesting story. At least I hope you found my story about what God did interesting. I always have. But the first thing I did, I was working there in the church, and the church had a full-time missions minister. They were approaching giving 50% of their funds to missions. They were so missions oriented. And the missions minister there became aware that, well, in 2001, the church was preparing to send 2 young people raised in the church and their spouses. It was a young man and his wife and a young woman and her husband into long-term missions. And so as the preparation started happening, the missions minister became aware that one of the mothers was struggling. So she asked me if I would talk to the mother. Well, I said sure, and I set up a time. I invited the mother to meet with me. I think it was a week from the next Thursday or something there. And then I thought, well, why not invite the other sending parents in the church to the meeting? And 7 people accepted the invitation. And there I was thinking, okay, I'm organizing a meeting for Parents of Missionaries, and I don't know anything about the needs or the experience of Parents of Missionaries. So I had about a week, and I hightailed it over to Cincinnati Christian University Library to start poring over the missions literature to see what I could learn. So I would go into this meeting having a clue, I guess you'd say, about their experience and their needs. And I was stunned to find that in all the plethora of missions literature, I found Parents of Missionaries mentioned one time, briefly, in one-page article. Nothing else. I found tons of material speaking to the needs of missionary kids, missionary marriages, all kinds of mission needs that you know a lot about, but nothing about Parents of Missionaries. So I had faced this meeting feeling kind of vulnerable and inadequate. I thought, I don't know what how to help these people, but it's always people want to be together. So we met. And as it turned out, I didn't have a thing to worry about. As soon as these parents discovered that they were in a safe place with people who wanted to talk about the parent experience and people who could understand, it was like the floodgates opened. And out came floods of feelings, fears, concerns, questions, and just a desire to be together. And our meeting was 2 hours, and it was just a very memorable evening for all of us. So we decided to keep meeting we met once a month for 2 hours, and each month I would organize I would focus the meeting on different topics. There were so many things to talk about. And after about 10 months, I couldn't think of any other topics we hadn't covered. So, I said, where do we go from here? And their response was, well, we can't quit. And it's kind of like, well, what else are we going to talk about?
Yeah.
So then came the idea, let's open this up to others. So we established what we used to call the Greater Cincinnati Parents of Missionaries group. And we reached out to lots of neighboring churches and invited all sending parents to come to a monthly dinner meeting. We would have a catered dinner or pitch-in and have a speaker on a subject that would help the parents, or we would have a roundtable discussion of one of the important topics. And And once more, it was just a very exciting experience. The parents bonded, they couldn't get enough of it. And we just sort of knew we were onto something worthwhile, I guess. So from there, we created a website, and Diane and another one of the parents, Diane Stortz, and I started taking our message to the annual meeting of the National Missionary Convention. So we had all the tables and posters and curtains and whatever you need, and to carry our dog
started to have a platform.
Yeah, to 7 different cities and 7 different years. And there we would host coffees and man an information booth, and just talk with parents. And we led workshops, some for recruits, some for parents, some for church leaders, church and missions leaders. And we just learned so much. We got such different responses. I remember one evening we were going through the worship center, and I think we were passing out flyers about our parent workshop. And there weren't very many people. It was an hour or two before the service began. And one of the parents we came across, when she got it, she looked at it and started crying. And it's like, are you serious? And so it was that kind of thing. We saw it over and over again. The parents that we met there at these different occasions would just be so relieved and so grateful and so excited to find a place to talk, someone who could understand, to know they weren't alone, to learn something about what was happening to them. We hosted one seminar for recruits. We had a panel of recruits on the stage, and we listened to all of them. And then in the end, Diane got up to talk about her experience. I don't think either of us will ever forget it. They kind of sat there with their mouth open. They had no idea of what the parents' concerns were. The leaders
share with us a bit of what it was what are the common struggles? What are the themes that you were seeing began to meet with these parents?
Well, I think sort of what I was talking about, the relief and the joy when they found out there was somebody who understood.
Feeling known.
That's right, because I think what happens to the parents when the church learns that their children are going into missions, people say, you must be so proud. And I think one parent said, when someone said that to me, I wanted to hit them. They didn't understand. They just didn't understand. Parents struggle when their children make these decisions, often because it means they're not going to see very much of their children and grandchildren. And they hurt about that. And yet they feel guilty about how they feel, because if I loved the Lord, surely I'd be happy. And why am I not happy? And so there's this time that it gets stuffed inside, and people hurt, but they don't want to tell anybody.
Okay. And there's a lot of guilt and shame over not feeling happy.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
So when they get a name for it, when it's labeled grief, and they know that God created us to grieve when we have losses, they have a lot of positive emotional response to that. So the things that make them hurt are the fact that they will be separated from their children. A lot of their friends are obviously going to be completely involved in the life of their children and grandchildren. They're going to have their families there for holidays. They probably expected, and many of them often expected that for themselves. And so their visions for who they are and what their life will be is changed drastically. They have fears for the missionaries, their safety. They hate that they can't help them. They can't protect them. Their biggest pain was over, I found, not knowing their grandchildren. More than actually being separated from their children, it was the grandchildren that gave them the most distress. Many of them felt like it was very difficult to travel, very expensive. The mother of the young son who was going into long-term missions in Africa at LifeSpring that started her concern started the whole thing, was unable to travel. And her oldest son, who was just graduated as a physician, was leaving, and she couldn't go. And that kind of thing. Facing holidays with the empty chair, not having them home on special occasions, fears of growing old without the presence or the support of adult children.
A lot of loss.
Yes. And also, some of the parents we knew felt like, as the recruits were so excited and so energized by the idea of going, and so immersed and surrounded and involved with the sending groups, the missions committees or the sending missions organizations, the parents felt really marginalized. They felt like they had to take a back seat, that they
didn't have the time or attention that maybe they
weren't included. It's just sort of like it was all about the kid, and we didn't get to listen in and sit in as the planning happened and learning about.
I was reading through your book, and it was just that revelation and that reminder of how important it is to include the parents in the process, and how it's really not stressed. I mean, I'm not aware that it's been something that's been encouraged or stressed from the missions like recruiting side.
Having the open line, as open as possible in the lines of communication. And obviously, we know that there are different family dynamics out there, and I'm sure there are different dynamics from believing parents versus non-believing parents, and that has its own set of struggles. So what I heard a lot of was this loss, and you mentioned that the grieving, being able to name and grieve. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that looks like for a parent of a missionary?
Well, grief is an unavoidable response when we lose something we love, and they're not. Somebody challenged us in a workshop, and church leadership workshop, and said, "What's the big deal? They're not dead." Well, it's still a loss, even though they're alive, as I explained. But God, when we do lose anything, God built into us the grieving process. And that's a healthy thing. And it is through really intentional grieving that we heal, that we heal from the pain heals. And then we end up ideally getting changed, growing into bigger, stronger people as a result of it. It's a very positive thing. Mm-hmm. But if it's not named and not supported, then it can become a mental health problem. It can lead into depression and such. To successfully grieve, but that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be named, and parents need to talk about it. They need safe places to talk about it. They need to accept that this is happening and take proactive steps to say goodbye well, to acknowledge it and do things it's like when someone dies, it's good to go to the funeral. It's good to plant a tree. It's good to start a foundation. You need to take part in the going away, that if the church has a sending or the missions group has a sending ceremony, parents need to be included. They need to actually act out and say goodbye well.
It's an acknowledgement that it's a real thing, that it's a real loss, and that it needs its own grieving process, much like you said, like a death. But it's not a permanent.
No,
but it has its own significant pain.
It's a permanent loss many times for the life parents expected. And
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So they need to acknowledge it and give it a name, say goodbye, do things to accept it and acknowledge it, and then process those feelings. And
the disappointment, the frustration, the anger, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. And exactly that. And that's what a lot of that went on in the parents' meetings. There was just lots and lots of crying, and it's great. That's fine. And that was healing. And then from there, of course, especially professionals like yourself who are working with parents, help them channel what's happened into growth, into expanding, changing in positive ways. And the opportunities are many, but there are also many pitfalls because there can be other complicating stressors at the same time. And if they're ashamed of their grief, or they don't know what's happening to them and they feel bad about themselves, or they're expressing their anger in unhealthy ways or something, then it can lead to poor mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And which, you touched on in your book, like we're talking about a population that's already aging more significantly.
Yeah.
And so there's usually other health complications, or could be potential for that. And so that the mental health piece becomes even more significant, as it can be exacerbating to the physical health issues.
A lot of the parents are at a very vulnerable stage in life. There are many other losses happening at the same time. And those are endless. Loss of mobility, loss of health, loss of employment and employment roles, challenge, it's loss of friends. We start to lose our friends. We start to lose our family members. And it's just
compounding all these losses.
It all compounds. And if parents don't get support and can't talk about it and don't understand how to grieve well, it may not get to the growth place, and people may get what we call stuck in grief.
Yeah. I think one of the areas that is a positive channeling of the grief and so on is working on visiting, or how to creatively stay in touch, whether it's face-to-face, or can you just talk a little bit about some of the creative ways people have for being in touch, or some of the things that they've been able to do to try to minimize the distance?
Well, I think it starts with the recruiting stage. I think the best of all worlds is when church leaders, missions leaders, counselors, whomever, help the recruits sit down and devote time to talking with their parents. And the recruits come to understand the parents are struggling, and the parents listen hard to understand the recruits. So that communication before the separation starts, I think, is key. And
it helps set expectations.
Yes. And just to understand, and then building on that, ideally, is a strong commitment to stay in touch. I mean, I don't think it's just a random, send a package or send an email or something. I think it starts in the beginning with, okay, here we're a family. God established the family. That doesn't change when you go on the mission field. Jesus never forgot about his mother, and we saw that on the cross, even that in his agony he remembered her. And being a mission recruit does not absolve young adults from being in touch and caring about their families. So I think that beginning communication and commitment is the foundation, and then from there it's just being very proactive. There are many back in the day, I think Skype was really big. I'm not sure that gets used anymore, but there are other technologies now, Signal and WhatsApp, and I forget what's some other ones that you can have face-to-face, which is really better than anything else. And sending packages and special occasions and needs, and grandparents would often play games over the Skype call, the Zoom call, whatever, with their kids, read stories to them. Yeah, but key, of course, is visiting if possible. That was so important, to actually, for the parents to make the effort and actually go on the field to see what the kids are doing, to get to know the circumstances, the culture, maybe even learn a little bit of the language, and meet their community, the people in their community. That's so helpful.
Yeah.
And then,
you
of
can
course,
smell the smells and taste the food and be there and really
relate
much
so
better
much.
Understanding.
Yeah, it's just sort of, you may know from your own experience what that means. It helps so much. And then, of course, when I know parents who kept bedrooms for their grandchildren, even though they were only home once every 2 years, or put in swing sets when they were coming home, and just really invest in their role as grandparents to be very, very proactive about it, or role as parents. So things like that.
And the local church can play a role in all of this too. So let's talk a little bit about the local church and how they can support the parents as well. I mean, they know their role to support the family, but I think this is a real educational piece to support the parents. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think that there are a lot of ways that the church can be aware of the parents. I think include them when they talk about what the children are doing in their sacrifice. And missionaries get very celebrated in local churches, but the parents are sort of like not mentioned usually. And there's a sending ceremony. Maybe the parents should be standing up with them and their loss acknowledged, I suppose. But I think people in the church, at least the church leadership, if they would help if they understood parents of missionaries and their needs, and asked about them, provided safe places for them to talk, maybe checked in with them. I think people in the church can be aware of holidays and pay attention to whether or not those parents are alone, because they're part of their family lives out of state and part are on the mission field. That's kind of a very hard time for the parents, is the holidays, birthdays, those kind of things. I've heard of churches who stepped up where adult children might have helped. If the parents have mobility troubles, or even if they don't, the youth group might go over and rake leaves, do something to help them out or meet other needs. Just keep an eye on them and be aware of them. Some churches have designated some money to help the parents get to the mission field. Not all the parents can afford that. And that can be considered in the church budget. And then again, you said churches, but at LifeSpring, it was the church who was sending the missionaries. They were the full support of these two missionaries. But a lot of missionaries come home and their furloughs are devoted to going church to church to church to church to raise money. And guess who barely sees them when they're home after waiting for 2 years or whatever it is. And the parents don't get included in the schedule. So I think missions and church leaders who work to promote the missions can also make sure that the parents get some time and understand that, and how good it is, not only for the parents, but for the kids and grandkids. So
helping to prioritize that relationship as much as
exactly possible. Yeah. And I think it's, it has kind of, previously, it has not gotten much support, recognition, I guess.
So would you say are some of the blessings that are discovered in the life of a parent of a missionary?
Well, missionaries, I think the missionaries who believe, there's an enormous joy in having a child who grow up to love the Lord, and love the Lord in such a serious ways that they dedicate themselves. Almost felt like we were met with suspicious eyes sometimes. Parents of missionaries are happy about missions. They're for missions, but they're for missions and hurting at the same time. So I think, we don't want to just not talk about the joy they have and what it means. And I think every time we're hit with hard changes in our life, it opens up an opportunity that many people take to lean more on God, to trust God more. So I think a lot of parents and missionaries really do wrestle with God, and that, often can resolve itself in a really good way. The opportunities for missionaries to grow and be blessed because this happened to them are pretty extensive. They get a chance to learn about new cultures and go to new places and meet new people, and a lot of times they make very good friends with other parents of missionaries, and Sometimes they channel their grief into making missions part of their life. They become involved in supporting ministries, or, maybe becoming a forwarding agent for the missionary, or helping in some other way. And then on the personal front, when you're not immersed in being a grandparent, or like happens so much, you end up asking, who am I? And sort of getting to know yourself better and finding new roles, expanding things that you've done before. I think once the children aren't there, I think empty nesters kind of look at each other. I put a chapter in my book, Do I Know You? It's kind of like marriages can kind of take a back seat during the career building years and the child raising years. And it's a chance to really vitalize what could have been sort of a stale marriage, I guess. That can happen. Just lots of ways that God opens doors after unexpected change, I guess.
I'm hearing you talk about there's opportunities for growth, and you've used that word various times, and it is wise, I think, to realize that loss isn't just loss. It's loss so that something else can replace it, and something else can fill those empty hands or arms that you thought were going to be filled with grandchildren. They're going to be others to love and care for, or whatever he puts in your hands. And
you integrate what's happened into who you are, and then you live that out in new ways, and God uses that. And it's really a beautiful process. But people, if it's not understood and it's not labeled, then sometimes it doesn't move along the way God wants it to, I think, in that healthy way. So
Can you just talk a little bit about how sometimes when you've run into a parent that's not excited about their child going overseas, or a parent that is not a person of faith, and they just don't understand this, it doesn't make any sense to them at all, what kinds of things has God given you to say in those kinds of situations?
Well, pretty much the same thing, that it's hard, and you want, ideally we want a healthy relationship with the children, and there really isn't another good choice other than to take what has happened, face it, accept it, talk about it, and try to create the strongest relationship you can, even if it's not what you want, or you don't agree with the children's choices. What we found was really kind of a dangerous situation working with recruits, is that when the parents weren't supportive, the recruits sometimes were critical of their parents and sort of backed away from their parents, and invested themselves with their colleagues and the groups that were helping them, and it didn't get resolved. And when the recruits leave without a resolved relationship with the parents, the evidence is pretty clear that those recruits don't stay as long on the mission field, and they leave more often. So no matter how the parents feel, it's really important to accept the child's choice. Ideally, give them the blessing. Give them your blessing to be separate from you and do what they feel they need to do, and put together the strongest relationship you can, because it's good for everybody.
That is a very insightful. I think so often we want to push forward with, well, the ministry is the most important thing. And it really,
yes.
The ministry can't go on if the people and relationships aren't healthy.
No, I've always believed that whenever God is in something, everybody wins, and when you get into winners and losers, I just don't think that's God. I think that somehow, if God is in this mission decision, that in the end, it will be good, that the parents will be blessed, the family will be solidified, and the mission will go forward. And there's a danger, partly because a lot of young recruits leave when they're in a transitional stage of development with their parents anyway. It's sort of like in your 20s, it's kind of your job to separate from your parents. Yeah. Well, if you haven't separated success, and that gets completed by the time you're 30 normally. But if that separation has been complicated or kind of adversarial or something, and the recruits leave under that tone, it doesn't end up benefiting anybody. The parents are hurt and the mission is hurt, and actually the kids are hurt. What we need is communication and cooperation, I guess. And that's sometimes, it's not what you want to do, but it's what needs to happen. And that's where missions leaders, churches, counselors can help parents and recruits get a strong foundation. It benefits the kingdom work and individual lives.
Thank you. That's helpful perspective to have.
Okay.
We've covered quite a bit about the struggles and the blessings and some of the realities of being a parent of missionary. And I know that we're just scratching the surface today in this conversation of all the things that can be unpacked. We want to recommend your book, Parents of Missionaries. We will link it in our show notes. But are there any other resources that you want to make sure our audience is aware of?
Yeah, following the Parents of Global Workers Facebook page. I really believe that's very helpful. It's hosted by Mark and Jill Brazel. They're with Pioneer Bible Translators. And I enjoy following a lot of parents on there. Parents post about their travels. They post pictures of their family. They post about their resources. They post about their feelings. And it's just amazing to read all the comments, all the other parents are saying, I understand, I've been there. And it's just a really positive place, I believe. So Parents of Global Workers on Facebook. And then Amy and Dan Williams, they're with ABWE, Baptist Missions Organization Member Care. And they host a conference for Parents of Missionaries 4 times a year. The most recent one was in September in Lynchburg, Virginia, and they're planning one in Ohio or Indiana. I'm not sure where yet. North Carolina. They had one in Michigan not too long ago. So they always promote that on the Facebook page. That's a good place to look at it. And those are the 2 things I know of that are pretty active places I know of, except for other isolated missions groups that are aware of Parents of Missionaries and reaching out to them. But those 2 things are being pretty serious about their ministry.
That's great.
I think Marco
I wasn't aware that there was a full conference for Parents of Missionaries.
Yeah. I actually had planned to go this year, but my husband and I went to the American Association of Christian Counselors Conference at Opryland in Nashville in September, and we both came down with COVID. So I missed out, but I wanted to learn more. But anyway,
yes. Yeah.
So then, of course, like I said, there are the websites or the online apps that.
Yeah. So we'll be sure to share in our show notes those 2 resources, and then your book, and then you also have a tip sheet for Parents of Missionaries.
Yeah.
I'm sure our audience can find that there because it's full of great resources.
Yeah.
This is wonderful.
It's been great reading the book, and it's been great reading through this tip sheets for Parents of Missionaries as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm so
glad these resources and being aware of this finding this need and being ready to meet the need and do what you can to raise awareness.
God did that. Diane and I, neither one of us saw this coming. God put it in our laps, and it's fun to see. It's joyful to see what He's done with it. And Diane and I both really appreciate your interest.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Much. Well, thanks for joining us today.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, Cara, give me some of your impressions of our conversation with Cheryl.
Yeah, so I just was encouraged about how when she started talking with Parents of Missionaries, she realized there was this common theme of them feeling kind of lost in the church and not really seen. And I just was struck by how, that is actually something pretty easy to remedy. In our churches, if we would see those Parents of Missionaries and give them a space and a place to be heard and understood, and that their struggles don't have to be alone, and that they're just as valid as the struggles of the missionary that is gone.
Yeah, that really struck me too, just about and how for seemingly now for years, it would appear that it's kind of been overlooked. And so there's the opportunity to change that. And local churches can play a role in that, in communicating with the parents and trying to make sure the parents' needs are being taken care of, and making sure that those parents are being, like you said, being heard, and just stepping in to help out however they can.
Yeah, there's a sacrifice on the parents' end as well as the kids, and just that we acknowledge that sacrifice and we don't minimize it.
Yeah,
I think we'll go a long ways. And the agencies have a part to play in this. I mean, we all within the missions community have a part to play.
Yeah.
So I feel like she had some great resources, and her book is an awesome resource. So if you are a parent of missionary or want to learn more about how to care for parents and missionaries, I highly recommend her book. We will have her book here in our show notes, so please take a look at that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening.
Thanks for joining us, and please like and subscribe.
Thank you for joining us for the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, or maybe the podcast you heard today, you've been prompted to pass this along to someone you know that could benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy lives to help us learn more about missionary care.
We want to thank Tim Downing for the music he wrote and performed for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can find out more about Tim at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos, and our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Githens, my amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website to see more of Micah's great work at sanctuaryinn.org.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.